What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are remastering Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four because, as always, with the old videos I used to do that just weren't very interesting, we go back and redo them in order to make them more interesting. But this story is the Fantastic Four story, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of the Fantastic Four film borrows heavily from this run. It's one of the most phenomenal runs ever written, ever in the history of the characters. Now, this takes place during Dark Reign. Dark Reign is a story that took place after the events of Secret Invasion. We're not going to spoil it because we are going to start covering Secret Invasion on Sundays. But the thing behind this is that this basically picks up initially with Franklin Richards and Valeria. Now, the thing behind this is that Franklin and Valeria are the kids of Reed Richards and Susan Storm. For those of you guys who saw Doctor Strange 2 Multiverse of Madness and you were super hyped up when Reed Richards and the Illuminati said that he has kids of his own, that's because he was referring to Franklin and Valeria. So Valeria is as smart as Reed Richards is. And in fact, Valeria Richards, Reed Richards, and Dr. Doom usually kind of trade the #1 spot in the Marvel Universe for the smartest person in all of existence, right? The smartest person in the universe itself. The thing with Franklin Richards is this is a kid that can alter reality on a universal scale. The kicker to this is that a long time ago, basically he had mental blocks put in place so he couldn't consciously utilize the full totality of his power. But the thing behind this is that this basically picks up with them essentially moving back to the Baxter building. So not a great big huge deal. Then of course everybody's sort of getting their things sorted out and trying to figure out what they're going to do and, getting things moved. And, Johnny Storm is lamenting the fact that he lost the phone numbers of all these chicks in New York who were just hot and single and, looking to get some of that Johnny Storm action. But of course, Reed Richards is supposed to be helping, but when they get down to his lab, he's actually working on this gigantic bridge. Now, the cool thing about this, as Reed explains it, is the bridge allows him to look into alternate realities. So for those of you guys who saw our initial coverage of Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, we actually didn't include this. So we're basically including it here in order to make it all make sense. For those of you guys who are following or who have seen my videos on Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, when Reed Richards creates the bridge or uses the bridge to basically see the Illuminati in other realities to see how they fare against the incursions, this is where it starts. This is where he comes up with the idea for the bridge in the first place. Now, the kicker to all this is that you actually have H.A.M.M.E.R agents that are coming to the Baxter building for the Fantastic Four. Now, the thing about this, and that's what's so funny here, these guys come busting into this place. But what's also kind of wild is that at the same time that happens, Reed Richards basically enters the bridge into what's kind of this nexus of realities, if we want to call it that, this sort of place where he can see or at least experience pretty much every universe that exists out there. And so it's one of those things where when the H.A.M.M.E.R agents break in, the Fantastic Four do not initially know that it's happening. But once they start to realize that it's happening, when power is basically taken down in the building by the H.A.M.M.E.R agents, you have Sue, you have Johnny, and you have Ben, who essentially go, get on an elevator to go down to the first floor. And then of course it shuts down. What that means is it leaves Franklin and Valeria unprotected. Now, here's the thing about this. That segment of the story, when it comes to Reed and Ben and Johnny, they're going to actually end up being forced through different realities themselves. Their story's not overly important because the realities aren't really all that interesting. But what we end up doing here is basically switching over to Franklin Richards when he draws 2 toy guns on the H.A.M.M.E.R agents. So the H.A.M.M.E.R agents think he's adorable. They think he's super cute. Son. They have no idea what they're messing with. They have no idea what they're messing with here, right? They have no clue what they're doing with this kid. Now, nothing crazy happens, right? Like what's actually going on is behind Franklin, Valeria, with all her intelligence, is actually putting together a phone, but she makes it look like a gun, and then she points it at the H.A.M.M.E.R agents. They basically issue a summons and essentially saying that like Norman Osborn's going to be here tomorrow. You guys better meet him when he arrives, something along those lines, more or less. But the important thing here is switching over to Reed. This is cool because this is when we get to see all these different realities that exist out there. The main motivation going on here with Reed Richards is that he looks back over the events of Civil War. He looks at the formation of the Illuminati. He looks at Secret Invasion, and he sees it all as being his fault. And the reason for this isn't necessarily because it is, but it's because Reed Richards is so incredibly intelligent that quite literally the things that he comes up with can make or break not just the world, but even the universe itself. The guy is just incredibly capable when it comes to technology. And so what he does is he tells this machine, this device that he has, show me how many viewable realities similar to our own enacted some type of superhuman legislation during roughly the same period of time that we did. And he's basically told there's about 12.5 million realities where that's the case. Then he says, okay, of those realities, how many resulted in a conflict within the metahuman community? Basically, civil war. And he's told 3 million of them. And he's like, okay, of those, how many resulted in a peaceful resolution? And the answer he's given, 418. Of all the realities that existed out there, 12.5 million basically passed legislation and saying superhumans have to register their identities with the federal government. 3 million of those basically resulted in a Civil War event, and 418 of those Civil War events ended peacefully, right? The other remaining however many million basically ended up in all the superheroes being killed in some form or fashion. And that's one of the things that happens right here, right? Like, we're literally told, case study Earth 155. In this reality, Reed Richards and Hank Pym initiated the Registration Act. Pym died of an aneurysm 2 days after the law was enacted, and while there was one major skirmish, Reed notices and says, "I was able to convince everyone of the necessity and sanctity of appearing to be accountable to human law, to man-made law," right? So literally it was Reed Richards who was able to talk everybody down in that alternate reality. Case study Earth 3490. This basically had the exact same thing. It was actually Iron Man, who's a woman, cue all the guys that hate chicks in position of power complaining, but it was Iron Man who was a woman basically marrying Captain America, right? Like, it's literally all those different things, right? Case study Earth 1,789,002. That the 50-state initiative program was successful because a serum was developed to give abilities to everybody who wanted them. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, the 50-state initiative was a concept that was basically built or developed by Reed Richards and Hank Pym and Tony Stark that was kind of an answer to the Superhuman Registration Act. That in order for superheroes to continue functioning, what would happen is there would be a superhero team in all 50 states, and they would be answerable to the federal government. Now, the initiative was also a comic book line, and it was basically superheroes training the next generation of superheroes. It was Marvel's attempt to kind of build out the idea or the concept of like young Avengers and like young X-Men and that kind of a thing. It was okay. It wasn't all that great. But another example is Earth 26, where Reed Richards takes away everybody's superpowers across the board. Earth 1735 was a reality where basically the Superhuman Registration event went through, right? That legislation became law because there was no one like Captain America to stand in the way, because Captain America hadn't been discovered yet, right? He was still frozen in ice at the time that registration went through. But the reality here is Reed Richards notices a kind of constant through all these different universes that he's looking through, right? He notices one thing that never changes. In all the instances where there was some peaceful resolution to the Civil War event, it was him acting alone. It was not having any involvement from Hank Pym or Tony Stark or anybody else. It was him relying on his own intelligence. And that's one of those instances where basically what Reed is saying here is Civil War could have potentially happened differently had it been some scenario that had unfolded where there had been no Tony Stark and there had been no Hank Pym, because they wouldn't have been able to get him to change his mind on certain things. And so as a result of that, he's like, okay, let's see if we can't take a look around any more of these different realities. And so following that, he takes his investigations a step further. Knowing how Civil War could have ended, then the question becomes, how do things exist in other realities when it comes to members of the Illuminati, right? 67 worlds where the Illuminati formed and things went peacefully, because the reality is that when it comes to the Illuminati in Marvel Comics, they usually create more problems than they solve. Hence the reason why they were the reasons why Secret Invasion happened in the first place. Had it not been for them, Secret Invasion never would have taken place. So it's one of those things where like they usually create issues because as smart and intelligent as they are, the reality is that their goals exceed their grasp, and so they end up just creating issues. But he says, I learned that only 67 Earths that had suffered through both a superhero civil war and the creation of the Illuminati would actually know peace. So of those 418, now there's only 67 that have both a civil war and an Illuminati event where things don't go south. He says the truth of the why was even more disturbing than the evidence. And he says, case study Earth 976. This world's Reed Richards convinced Tony Stark that if they had the larger interests of the planet in mind, then they should include members who could protect it best. The difference here, and this is one of the more significant things, is that when the Illuminati was originally formed, it was Reed and it was Tony Stark and it was Doctor Strange and Black Bolt of the Inhumans, which I don't understand why because he sucks, and Professor Xavier of the X-Men, so on and so forth, right? They were all brought together because it was believed they were the ones best suited to basically lead the Illuminati and to keep the world safe, because they had kind of taken it on their shoulders. We're the leaders of some of the most significant teams, or we're the most intelligent people, or we know more about magic than anybody else, but we have decided that we are the best decision. When the reality here is that Reed kind of harbored these doubts and saying, okay, are we really the ones best suited to be making this decision? Should it only be us? Or if we're looking to actually safeguard the world as a whole, should we bring in people like Doctor Doom and Magneto and so on and so forth? But that never happened. However, in this world, it seemed like it did. Now, there's another instance, right? Case study Earth 231. The world worlds, Reed Richards avoided all future calamity caused by the Illuminati by eliminating them at the point of inception. Literally, the instant the team came together and they said, okay guys, let's do this, Reed was like, no, this was a bad idea, and just killed them all on the spot. And again, he dives a little bit further here in saying, okay, like how far reaching are the effects of the things that the Illuminati did? For example, learning about the Beyonder and different things like that. So he studies the Beyonder momentarily and comes to this realization on Earth 538, after being confronted, the Beyonder chose to remake the world into a place where he was worshipped and adored. That this Earth knew peace, as all heroes and villains were transported to a reimagined battle world, and that war was not so secret. There was another reality, right? Case study Earth 2819, where the Beyonder destroyed the world and then recreated it with no human life on it whatsoever, and then created one man and one woman and let it basically just kind of start from scratch. He effectively became God. It's one of those wild things, right? It's him just looking at all these different realities here. But what we end up doing is basically transitioning while Reed is kind of going through all these different universes. We transition to the next morning when Franklin Richards wakes up alongside Valeria to the realization that Norman Osborn is on his way to the Baxter Building. Now, those of you guys who have read about Franklin Richards and you know how powerful Franklin Richards is, I'm sure you've seen this moment. For those of you guys who don't know anything about Franklin, you're going to get what's probably the most interesting and unique aspects of reality warping. But the thing behind this is that when Norman Osborn arrives, initially Valeria and Franklin just kind of play dumb, right? They just kind of play silly, and they're like, well, I mean, you know, like, you can't go see them right now, you know, they're really busy and that kind of a thing. And Valeria sort of puts on this little bit of a show and so on and so forth, but ultimately she ends up leading Norman Osborn to Franklin Richards, right? She's like, you're not going to meet my dad, you're going to meet him. And then of course Franklin Richards has like a mask on and that kind of a thing, and it's kind of funny because he's literally just got like these toy guns, right? These little pop guns, you know, at his disposal. But again, it's a really, really hilarious moment because knowing who Franklin Richards is and knowing what he can do, this is a pretty dangerous situation to be in. But ultimately we kind of switch back to Reed Richards for a moment, and after having gone through all these different universes, Reed Richards comes to the realization that he really is the only one who can fix everything, right? He's the only one that can solve the problem of everything, that it all basically comes down to him. And the question is, if it does come down to him, then how does he fix everything, right? How does he solve everything? And so what he does is he basically says, okay, like it's time for me to fix this. And he ultimately just shuts the machine down because the intention and the purpose behind it was to quite literally just observe other realities. There was no motivation to it. But once power and everything is restored, and once Reed Richards is done and all that kind of stuff, everything sort of goes back to normal to a degree, in the sense that Susan and Johnny and Ben end up coming back to the main Marvel universe. Reed Richards basically emerges, and then literally they're caught up to by Franklin and Valeria, who were just running from Norman Osborn, who's basically shooting at them. And then like once the Fantastic Four arrive on the scene, they're like, get away from our kids, right? And here's the important thing to understand here. At this moment, Norman Osborn, normally he's the Green Goblin. This guy's the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., right? This guy is, well, at least used to be S.H.I.E.L.D. This guy's a big hitter. He's got the full might of the federal government behind him. So you can't simply just assassinate him, right? You can't just arbitrarily kill him. And even if you could, it's not really something the Fantastic Four would do. But it's one of those things where Susan Storm literally puts up force fields, basically locks Norman Osborn in place with them, and then blocks all of his forces on the outside so none of them can get in. And then in turn, it basically turns into a conversation between Reed Richards and Norman. And it's one of those things where Norman is just kind of like, okay, here's the deal, right? Like, this is not done. Like, you guys have me on the ropes. Sure, you got me back into a corner, whatever, but I'm gonna come back, right? Like, my word is law now. Like, this is like the Registration Act. Everything that I'm doing here, it's incontrovertible. It is directly, like, I have the full backing of the federal government. There's nothing you can do to stop me outside of basically going underground and becoming outliers or something along those lines. And so at the end of the day, when he says like, this is not even close to being finished, the response of Reed is, no, it's not, but you're leaving right now. And one of the things that happens is that as Reed turns to walk away, Norman Osborn pulls a gun to shoot him, and there's just this bow, right? This gunshot that goes off, and then you literally have Franklin Richards standing there with a smoking gun that's not real. And that's the power of Franklin Richards. This kid can alter reality, right? So what this kid basically did was fire a real bullet out of a fake gun. That's literally what he did. Now, this is the importance behind this. This is one of the things that's going to be ridiculously important over the course of our coverage of Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four. There was an old Fantastic Four story way back in the day when Franklin Richards was was messing around with a Rubik's Cube, trying to solve it and getting really, really frustrated, or playing with some kind of toy or something like that. There was a TV commercial that came on in the background that said, when are you gonna grow up? And Franklin Richards subconsciously aged himself into an adult. When the dust settled and everything went back to normal, and then Reed Richards figured out what was going on, he realized, okay, so Franklin has the ability to alter reality on a universal scale. And so we put mental blocks in place so Franklin couldn't consciously use his powers. But over the years in Marvel Comics, those powers have manifested, right? In the aftermath of the Onslaught saga, basically when Franklin Richards resurrected all the dead superheroes, he literally brought them back to life and put them in an alternate reality. To give you guys perspective here, it's like during the events of Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, right? Thanos snaps his fingers, he blinks out half the life in the universe, but Franklin Richards survives. So like Franklin Richards, if he existed in the MCU at the time, basically resurrects everybody who died and then puts them in an alternate reality that he carries around in the form of a blue ball. That's how powerful this kid is. But remember, the mental blocks are in place. He can't really access his power. And so as a result of this, you basically have this realization like, okay, Franklin's powers, like this is kind of wild. Now, one of the things that I want you guys to notice here is that because of all the commotion and all the panic and all the chaos, people don't realize Franklin has a toy gun. They don't realize it's a toy. And in fact, Johnny Storm takes the gun away from him pretty quickly. And so there is a kind of offhanded remark that Johnny Storm has as they're walking away where he's like, I don't understand it, right? It's a fake gun. Like, what in the world happened? But that's the thing. Like, they don't realize Franklin's powers have manifested in that moment. And no one's really giving it any thought. They will. But it's one of those things where Susan asks Reed, like, did you get everything you needed from that bridge, right? Did you get what you needed? And the response of Reed is, yes, I basically did. And she's like, then destroy the machine. Now, the funny thing about this is that what had happened is that where Reed had basically said, yes, I got everything that I needed, nothing else had happened, Reed had lied. Because in that moment, when he went to shut the machine down, he was like, wait, right? He's like, I have a question. And so the machine's like, what's your question? And he's like, one final projection. Eliminating all previous parameters. So not taking into account Civil War or Secret Invasion or the formation of the Illuminati or anything like that. How many other instances have there been requiring similar technology to your own? How many other bridges have been built? And the system starts processing it and it says 141. And that's literally when these individuals, these beings back behind this, or really within the bridge itself, appear to Reed Richards. And it's one of those things where literally he's like, nothing really happened here, right? Nothing significant happened. It's cool. That's literally when he's telling Susan, like, I'll shut everything down. It's not a great big huge deal. But the reality is a lot of things happen. That one of these voices or one of these beings talking to Reed says, let me guess, you want to fix things. And another one says, we can help you with that. And when Reed asks, who are you? Their response is, we're just like you, Reed, right? And we'll be here waiting for you when you're ready. But don't take too long. There's no telling how much worse things could get. And so Reed ultimately powers off the machine. And the irony behind all this is that where he told Susan, yes, I'll break the machine down, he openly admits, yeah, I did exactly what I told her I would do. I took the machine apart, I broke the machine down, and then I put it right back together again. With that being said, guys, the rest of Hickman's run, this is probably the slowest part of the run, to be honest. This and maybe the next one is probably the slowest part. After that, it takes off in an instant, right? It goes from 0 to 60. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.